evening to all of you. My dear friend, I am with you with this portion of a trunk surgery, the first chapter from Footprints Without Feet, 10 cbse. Up to we have read about Mrs. Pemfrey, the pet dog Tricky, and the narrator Harriet. Harriet was a veterinary surgeon. Now we will read about Tricky's condition. As you know, Mrs. Pemfrey was a rich lady and she has a pet dog, Tricky, and her dog has become hugely fat. It is because of overeating. And Mrs. Pemfrey used to give her dog Tricky a lot of things to eat. For example, cream, chocolate, ball of Horlicks, liver coat oil, etc. And Tricky had become very greedy. He can eat anything in any part of day and night. When Harriet saw Tricky, he realized the condition he felt. Tricky should be hospitalized because Mrs. Pemfrey can't stop herself to give Tricky extra food. And lastly, Mrs. Pemfrey had to give her pet dog Tricky to Harriet, and Harriet is now with Tricky in his car, and he is taking Tricky to his hospital. Okay, so let us start the lesson. At the surgery, the household dogs surged around me. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eye, and when put down, lay motionless on the carpet. The other dogs, after sniffing around him for a few seconds, decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. So Harriet and Tricky reached hospital, and Tricky was left with dogs. Okay, other dogs were very noisy and they came near to Tricky, but Tricky was motionless. He was motionless. He was inactive. And other dogs sniffed him for a few seconds, and they considered him as an uninteresting object, and he left the place and started to move. They started to move. Okay, I made up a bed for him in a warm loose box next to the one where the other dogs slept. For 2 days, I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. At the end of second day, he started to show some interest in his surroundings, and on the third, he began to whimper when he heard the dogs in the yard. Okay, so with other dogs, Harriet made a loose box for Tricky, and he observed him for 2 days, and Harriet did not provide him any food. He gave him plenty of water to drink. And on second day, there was slow progress because Tricky had taken interest in his surroundings, and he started to bark. He started to do some activity with other dogs. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe, the greyhound, and his friend. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dogs moved up down and garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat. Okay, so after then, Harriet observed Tricky. Okay, and Tricky was busy with another dog, and greyhounds, it means a kind of dog. Okay, and he also started to show interest, and he also started to inspect other dogs. Okay, and Tricky was also following other dogs with his surplus fat. Still now he was very fat, as I told you earlier. Okay, later that day I was present at feeding time. I watched while Tristan slopped the food into the walls. There was the unusual headlong rush followed by sounds of high-speed eating. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. So next day, Harriet was present there. He was carefully when Tristan, is the name, gave food into the bowl. other dogs started to rush towards the ball with high speed because they knew earlier that they will be responsible for not getting food if they can't reach there on time. When they had finished, Tricky took a walk around the shining balls, licking casually inside one or two of them. Next day, an extra ball was put out for him, and I was pleased to see him jostling his way towards it. Okay, eh, all the dogs had taken their meal, but Tricky was behind. He reached the shining near the shining ball and licked it and tasted it. But there was nothing to eat. There was nothing for Tricky to eat. So next day, there was no any extra ball for Tricky. Okay, and Harriet was very pleased to see Tricky, who was jostling, who was pulling and pushing other dogs to get near the ball. From then on, his progress was rapid. He had no medical treatment of any kind, but all day he ran about the dogs, joining in the friendly scrimmages. He discovered the joy of being bowled over, trumpet, tramped on, and squashed every few minutes. He became an unexpected member of the gang, an unlikely silky little object among the saggy crew, fighting like a tiger for his share at mealtime and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. He had never had such a time in his life. So from now we will get the improvement. Now we see Tiki was improving day by day, and his progress was very rapid now. As we have read, Tiki was not given any medicine, okay, but he was recovering very rapidly. Okay, he ran with other dogs. He was also the part of other dogs, and there was friendly scrimmages. Scrimmages means rough and noisy sound. Okay, he discovered he also was running. He also was enjoying in with other dogs. Okay, and he became the member of other dogs. Okay, and he became the leader of that all dogs. Okay, he was fighting like a tiger for mealtime, and he was also hunting in old hen house at night. Okay, so in this way, Tiki had started to recover. All the while, Mrs. Pimfrey hovered anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletin. I dodged the questions about whether his cousins were being turned regularly or his correct coat was according to the weather, but I was able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger and convalescing rapidly. Okay. During this time, Mrs. Pemberley was hovering there. Means she wanted to know the condition of Tricky. She wanted to know the bulletins. Means she wanted to the latest notice about Tricky. And whenever she asked about Tricky, the narrator Harriet cheated her. She wanted to know. Mrs. Pemberley wanted to know about the coat, about the ball, about other things also. But simply Harriet replies that he is getting better and better. Okay, Tricky is out of danger. Okay, and he is recovering rapidly. The word convalescing seemed to do something to Mrs. Pemberley. She started to bring round fresh eggs, 2 dozen at a time, to build up Tricky's strength for a happy period. My partners and I had 2 eggs each for breakfast, but when the bottles of wine began to arrive, the real possibility of situation began to dawn on the household. Okay, so you should know that Mrs. Pemberley was very worried, and whenever she listens about Tricky's recovery, it was a kind of satisfaction for Mrs. Pemberley. And after then, Mrs. Pemberley started to give fresh eggs, 2 dozens at a time, and she used to give wine also. Okay, and all these things were eaten by James Harriet and his friends. Okay, and this was a time of enjoyment for Harriet and his friend. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion with 2 glasses of wine before the several during the meal, and all these things were given to Harriet to give it to Tricky, but it was a ceremonial time for Harriet and his friends. They had 2 glasses of wine. Okay, we could hardly believe it when the brandy came to put a final edge on Tricky's constitution. For a few nights, the finest spirit was rolled around, inhaled, and eventually run. Okay, in this way, Mrs. Pemberley sent brandy and for Tricky's Fiji, constitution is Fiji. But this all these things were taken by Mr. Harriet and his friend. They were days of deep content starting well with the extra egg in morning, improved and sustained by the midday wine, finishing luxuriously around the fire with brandy. And all these things were taken by Mrs. Harriet and his friend, and they were enjoying. Okay, they were having all these things for all these things as their meal. It was a temptation to keep Tricky as a permanent guest, but I knew Mrs. Pemberley was suffering, and after a fortnight felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. Okay, now Alicia, here you will get a question. Why did Mr. Harriet want to keep Tricky as a permanent guest? As you know, you have read the lesson. Tricky was kept by Harriet, and as a result of it, Mrs. Pemberley sent a lot of things like brandy, dozens of eggs for Tricky, but all these things were eaten by Harriet and his friend. So that's why Mr. Harriet wanted to keep Tricky as his permanent guest. Okay. So as Mr. Tricky, as Harriet knows, Mrs. Pemberley was waiting for Tricky's recovery. So after fortnight, lastly, Harriet compelled to phone Mrs. Pemberley and told her to come to and take Tricky. Within minutes, about 30 feet of gleaming black metal drew up outside the surgery. The chauffeur opened the door, and I could just make out the figure of Mrs. Pemberley, almost lost in interior. Her hands were tightly clasped in front of her. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Harriet, do tell me the truth. Is he really better?" And within few minutes, when Harriet telephoned Pemberley, within few minutes, she came to Harriet's hospital, and she was in his 30 feet shining black color car, and the driver of the car opened the door, and Tricky wanted to know about, Pemberley wanted to know about Tricky, and she asked Mr. Harriet, is he well? "Yes, he is fine. There is no need for you to get out of the car. I will go and fetch him." So simply Harriet replied, "Yes, he is fine. Tricky is fine. Don't come out of the car. He will go and he will bring Tricky." I walked through the house into the garden. A mass of dogs were hurtling round and round the lawn, and in their midst, ears flapping, tail waving, was a little garden figure of Tricky. In 2 weeks, he had been transformed into a hard-muscled animal. He was keeping up well with pack, stretching out in great bounds, his chest almost brushing and the ground. Okay, so he raced to Tricky, and there were pack of dogs. There were gang of dogs. They were pushing and pulling, hurting and pushing and pulling each other. Okay, and they were moving their tails, and Tricky was in them. Okay, within 2 weeks, he has been changed into a flexible, hard-muscled animal. Okay, and he was now well, and his chest was also touching the ground. I carried him back along the passage to the fortnight of the house. The chauffeur was still holding the car door open, and when Tricky saw his mistress, he took out from my arms in a tremendous leap and sailed into Mrs. Pemberley's lap. She gave a start and then had to defend herself as he soared over her, licking her face and barking. So this was the time when Mrs. Pemberley and Tricky was very close. After seeing his mistress, Tricky ran quickly. He climbed in her lap, and Tricky licked her face and started to bark. During this excitement, I had the chauffeur to bring out the beds, toys, cushions, coats, balls, and none of which had been used. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pemberley leaned out of the window. Tears shone in her car, in her eyes, her lip trembled. Oh, Mr. Hated, she cried, how can I ever thank you? This is a term of surgery. So you should know that she was very excited, and whatever she gave to Harriet to use for Tricky, but all these things were never used. Okay, so at the time of departure, Mrs. Pemberley started to weep. Okay, her lips trembled, and she said, how can I thank you? This is really a trump of surgery, really, this is a victory of surgery. So up to here, I'm going to tell you about the lesion. You just go through the lesion, read it. Lesion is very interesting, and you will get the question from the lesion and try to solve it. One thing I would like to tell you, in my previous session, I told you about stream of consciousness. Really, stream of consciousness school was initiated by William James, and you can get the use of stream of consciousness in James Joyce Ulysses, and Virginia was also she also used stream of consciousness in her work. Okay, thank you to all of you. Have a good nice day. Thank you.